In this video, I'm going to talk through some of the elements of your culturally and linguistically responsive unit template. So you can see here that I have it open, and I've gone through the unit template and I've highlighted in different colors, different aspects of the unit plan that you should target or work on for different weeks, depending on the topics and the content that we'll be covering. But in this video, I just want to give you kind of an overview of the entire template so that you can see what you'll be working on. And again, before you watch this video, make sure you read the assignment description and look through the rubric so you have a larger sense of what I'm looking for in this assignment. The aim, as I mentioned in that document, is really for you to begin to think about how to plan responsive instruction for multilingual students. And you'll be developing a large unit or an entire unit framework in this course. And then we'll be looking at more specific lesson design as you move into 519 if you're in the TESOL BDL program. So let's take a look. So here in the template, you see that we begin with the title, the grade level, so kind of some basic aspects of your unit, time frame, so how many weeks the unit would last or how many days. And here you see a section that says guiding questions and or big ideas. So what I'm asking for here is for you to think about kind of those higher level questions that would guide student learning in this unit. And there's an and or there. They can be guiding questions or big ideas, or you can list both. And so I included an optional chapter if these are terms that are unfamiliar to you, or if you just want kind of a deeper understanding of what I mean here. But essentially, we know from research that Marzano and colleagues and others have conducted that higher level questions tend to lead to deeper learning, especially when we share those types of big ideas or guiding questions with students, because they establish a mental set for students to process the learning experience. They also provide the why to students. Why are we learning about the water cycle? Why should I care about this lesson about persuasive writing, or this unit about persuasive writing? So we're giving students the big ideas or the guiding questions that will interest them in the unit and also get them thinking more deeply about the content. So for example, I'm married to a historian, and so something that he often has his university students do, and I know that the high school social studies students do this as well, is they analyze primary sources. So there might be lessons or an entire unit designed that involves analyzing primary sources. However, that goal, while it may be an objective, isn't a big idea. It isn't a guiding question that would be very motivating to a secondary student who might say, I don't really care about analyzing old documents or analyzing a letter that was written hundreds of years ago. And so some big ideas that might frame a unit focused on analyzing primary sources is an idea such as those in power often shape the narrative. There are multiple perspectives on any event, or history is not static. Those are big ideas that inform why it's important to analyze primary sources, but go beyond it. Some questions that might be guiding questions that might be connected to this unit, and I'm borrowing these from Jim Burke, which is the chapter about big ideas that you see linked, are from whose viewpoint are we seeing or reading? Excuse me, let's try that again. From whose viewpoint are we seeing or reading or hearing? And how do we know what we know? So those are some interesting questions that students would bring to the learning about analyzing primary sources. So that's what I'm getting at with guiding questions and big ideas. And you'll see some more examples in Brightspace as well of ways you might address this section here. And then here I'm asking you to provide the context of the unit. So when are you teaching this unit? What would students have done before this unit or after this unit? So you're kind of helping me understand where it falls within the scope of the year and why. Then you're going to be addressing HRL learning goals, or historically responsive literacy learning goals. So you should have watched the webinar already where Goldie Muhammad outlines what these are and why they matter, why she came up with this as a framework to help teachers think about unit design. And as I mentioned in our course, it's important to recognize that even if you're not a language arts teacher, you teach literacy. All teachers teach language and literacy, or should, because it's a part of how we communicate. It's a part of engaging students with text. So no matter what your content area is or your grade level, you should be thinking about language and literacy goals. So while she says literacy, I want us to think about literacy more expansively, engaging with texts, any sort of writing that students are doing. And these are the 4 goals that she identifies in her framework. In the webinar, she also adds joy. So if you'd like to mention joy as well, you are welcome to add that. But we have identities. How will this unit help students learn something about themselves and others? How does it connect to students' backgrounds and experiences? The skills that students are developing in the unit, their intellect, what they're learning about, so kind of knowledge, and then skills, what they can do, and criticality, how this unit will engage students in thinking about power, equity, and anti-oppression. So developing some of that critical lens on the world. And so I've used these goals in previous courses. And so just to give you an example of how some of my students have approached this in the past. I had one group of students who were working collectively on a unit, and they decided that their overarching theme for a 4th grade unit was focused on water. And so they thought about how a unit on water could address each of these different HRL learning goals. So for identities, they had students think about how they use water in everyday life, to learn about water sources in their local community and outside of their local community. And so the teachers were specifically thinking about focusing on communities where their immigrant students were from. So they would learn about water sources in Guatemala, in Honduras. So find not only their own local community, but then specifically thinking about their multilingual learners in the design of the unit. For skills, students were going to be learning measurement. So they were going to be measuring the volume of water, understanding how volume changes when water is poured into different shapes. So they're deepening their understanding of how to measure liquids. For intellect, they were learning about the water cycle, and they were also learning about how natural disasters involving water occur. So how hurricanes occur, how floods occur. So deepening their knowledge about water and natural disasters. And then with criticality, they explored water rights. So they looked at the growing movement to reclaim water rights for Indigenous people in the United States. They also looked at climate change and its impact on natural disasters involving water, and who is being most impacted by these types of natural disasters, hurricanes and floods especially. So you can see how they took a simple topic, or what seems at face value as a kind of simple topic, water, and they were able to dive into identity, skills, intellect, and criticality in this unit. And they brought in interdisciplinary connections, which I encourage you to do. I know it's harder at the secondary level, but especially if you teach elementary students, thinking about how you can bring in math and science and language arts in a unit is really powerful and important. If you teach secondary students, you can still think about making some of those connections. If you're teaching language arts, it follows that you might be able to make kind of some more social studies connections in a unit, depending upon what students are reading and engaging with in your course. All right. As we continue, we get to responsiveness by multilingual learners. So here you're telling me, how are you thinking about specifically planning this unit to be responsive to the needs and strengths of your multilingual students? So how you're connecting to their backgrounds and experiences, how you're ensuring that they can engage fully with the content and language learning. So how are you already at the very beginning planning to make this unit responsive? And connected to that is, how are you meaningfully engaging with parents or the community? So I want every unit should in some way involve parents or the local community, whether they're engaging with the local community by engaging in some sort of cleanup, or there's a local organization that they're working with or that they're learning about, or maybe you have parents come in and participate in the unit in some way. Maybe they're coming in and teaching students something, or maybe they're sharing something from their own experiences that relates to the unit. So thinking about how you could meaningfully involve parents is important. So that's what you're expected to do for this week, just to give you a little bit more of a wider lens on the rest of the unit. Next week, we're going to be diving into content standards, language standards, and then content and language objectives. So you'll be specifically addressing the content and the language learning goals that you have for your unit. You'll be planning a summative assessment, so some meaningful way that you'll evaluate if students have mastered those content and language objectives. Here you have a section for materials and resources. You're welcome to start working on this now if you already have some ideas for specific resources and materials that you want to include. Here you have background knowledge or skills, and then how you're going to build and assess students' background knowledge. So how you'll know what students already know about the topic, and how you'll build upon what they need to know to be able to engage with the topic. And here you'll be identifying specific language that you'll be working on in the unit, which includes both vocabulary and then other important language features, different grammatical structures, verb types, etc. So again, we'll get into this more next week. Here we'll cover this when we get into vocabulary strategies, but this is where you'll give some examples of strategies for actually teaching some of the vocabulary words that you identified. And then here, we're going to come back to the guiding questions or big ideas that you identify for this week or that you begin to write for this week. So for each of those questions or big ideas, you're going to be thinking about how that you would apply that in your teaching. So how would you engage students in diving into that question or big idea? And then this is where you get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty of the unit, listing the language and content objectives that you identify, and then showing how you would teach those objectives, engage in some practice activities around those objectives, and then assess them. And so again, these aren't lesson plans. I'm not asking you to give me a detailed lesson, but I am asking you to kind of think about how you might cover these different objectives within a lesson or within a series of lessons. So it's kind of some big picture planning here. And then as we continue on, and again, we'll get into this as we move forward in this course in later weeks, we're going to be getting talking about different language domains in different weeks. So you have one week will focus on oral language, another on writing, another on reading. And so here you're talking about the opportunities that students will have to develop skills within each of these domains, and the supports that you'll provide so that students, especially your multilingual learners, can access the language and content. So here are what are the oracy scaffolds you're providing, the writing scaffolds you're providing, the reading scaffolds. So as we cover each of these topics in this course, you'll be adding some ideas, some scaffolds and strategies for your unit. Related to oracy is grouping, how you're going to be grouping students throughout the unit, in what ways you'll be varying groupings so that students are interacting with different peers and in different configurations for learning, how you're going to ensure that those groupings are meaningful. And we'll talk about grouping in depth when we get to the week on oral language. Here's where you talk about interdisciplinary connections, which will be easy if you've already thought about ways to connect to other content areas when you do your HRL goals. So how could you make connections to other content areas outside of the focal one for this unit? Here we get into differentiating. So obviously students will be at different levels of English language proficiency. And I use the term here, English learners, to just make sure we're clued in on the students who are learning English as a new language, are multilingual learners specifically. How are you going to be differentiating for those students who are acquiring English at school? So this is some examples of differentiating. And then this you'll learn about in week 9 when we talk about the WIDA model performance indicator, which is a guide to help teachers plan differentiation in their classes. So here you'll be choosing one of your content goals and thinking about how you could differentiate the language that you're requiring of students, so that students need to engage with that content goal at different levels. And I've divided them into these 3 levels. And here's where you list any references for things that you might list in your materials or anything else that's listed in your unit. All right, so that is big picture, what is going into this unit plan. Again, we are tackling it in pieces week by week. So please make sure you stay on top of it, because you won't be able to engage with week 6 unless you've done the work for week 3. So I've tried to be really strategic about dividing it up so it feels like it's a manageable chunk of work for any given week, and so that it corresponds to the topic for that week as well. And I look forward to reading these unit templates and supporting you through this process. And please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions.